Hello. Thank you for joining us. Today's story is a real good one, and in many ways, actually, it's not a real good one in that it's fairly tragic, actually, and I think explains a lot about what's wrong with humanity and our place in the world. So now that I've set it up and maybe have you a little bit intrigued, I'd like to read it to you. It's found in Genesis chapter 25, verses 19 through 34. And the story goes, these are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, and Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided, and one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." When the time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, with his hand gripping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff. I am famished." Therefore, he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is my birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. There is so much to be said, or could be said, or has been said about this story. And I'll begin by noting that it begins with a man despising his birthright, what was due him from birth. And this passage leaves us on the cusp of a much longer narrative in which we read about two brothers torn apart by one brother's double dealing, pitted against one another by their parents, who each, in their turn, favor one over the other. It begins with one son preferred by the father, the firstborn, Esau, and ends with the younger thwarting the cultural norms of his day and stealing away the eldest's inheritance. And then later, their father's blessing. And that blessing was taken, I might add, with the help of his mother. Mother turns on one son, Jacob, in preference of Esau. Now, make no mistake, Esau does not take this lying down. At this point, he sets his mind to the killing of his brother. Jacob is forced to flee and live far away with some relatives. He has some ups and then he has some downs. He too is tricked by his uncle, Laban. The trickster is tricked, and he's tricked into taking two of Laban's daughters as wives instead of the one that he wanted. He wanted Rachel, but ended up with Leah at first. Now that may not sound like too much fun for Laban's daughters, being used as pawns in the games that the men were playing, and I'm sure that it wasn't, but of course they didn't have much say in the matter. But Jacob, he got even in his own turn and bilked his uncle out of some livestock. So great guy, this Jacob. Well, the time eventually, if you read on in the chapters ahead, the time comes for the brothers to make amends. Jacob travels homeward and sends out in advance all manner of gifts to appease his brother, livestock and all sorts of things. And this may sound generous, but these are also the actions of a leader in wartime trying to buy off an opponent so as to avoid a conflict that they think they might lose. Jacob doesn't know if his brother's anger has cooled over the years. The night before the reunion, there is a sub-story where Jacob has this wrestling match with a divine stranger. And the story reads that he wrestled the Lord God, in fact, and he has his hip dislocated in the process. But then he was let go and lived to see another day. And that next day, we find Jacob probably limping to face his brother, who, I might add, has come packing. He's brought 400 men with him. And this makes Jacob nervous, obviously. It's like a scene before a fight where one side's lined up here and the other side's lined up here, and you don't know what's going to go down. So Jacob, being the gentleman that he is, lines up all of the maids with their children first, and then the wife that he least prefers, Leah, with her children, and then his favorite wife and hers. And then he lines them all up in the front as this sort of human shield or showcase, however you want to look at it. So again, great guy, but to his credit, he does stand in the front and waits to see what his brother's going to do. You can imagine it. Esau walking forward, picturesque scene. And much to the relief of everyone involved, and I'm sure Jacob's, of course, Esau weeps, hugs him, and kisses him, and all seems to be well. What a happy ending. The two brothers walk off to their new lives reconciled. So, what to make of all of this? Some sermons focus on the short-sightedness of Esau. I mean, who would give away their birthright, their inheritance, the family farm for a bowl of stew? Really, he has to get his priorities straight. That sermon might go and then chide us for the ways in which we are short-sighted and don't have our priorities straight. And some commentators have just honed in on Esau's intelligence, wondering if he weren't just a bit dim-witted. Either way, what of Jacob? You could just as easily, or maybe even you should, more rather, hear a sermon about Jacob and his need to bear some, if not most, if not all, of the blame. That would probably be the sermon I would rather preach. I mean, he's sometimes lauded as this clever trickster, but I think that, if we're being honest, he's behaving like a crook. Forget that his name lives on in antiquity as one of the great heroes. In these stories, he is pretty shifty. Well, some sermons focus on this story as an archetypal story. And what I mean by that is, it's a story that is so recognizable in its form that we see it repeated again and again and again in other stories and in real time, and in fact, in reality. In fact, this is also a recurring theme in the Hebrew Bible. Cain and his brother Abel, Cain killing Abel, Joseph and his brothers throwing Joseph in a ditch or selling him to Egypt. And then, of course, the sons of King David, who so fractured the kingdom that it was never the same. Children, siblings, at each other's throats, sometimes killing each other. And for what? Well, for what they think they deserve. For the privileges and the possessions that they think is their right. Shall I say birthright? And all of this leaves me wanting to add, who decides that Esau should have the rights to the family farm in the first place? Just because he was the firstborn, that doesn't make him any better. And you might respond, well, it was cultural. But just because it's common to many, if not most persons, doesn't make it right. I had thought, when I was first mulling things over, that I was going to preach or write a succinct sermon on reconciliation. I thought I was going to fast forward to the part where they're hugging and kissing and it's all good. And I thought that I would say, well, would you look at that? Esau called things off. Esau moved past this. Good on Esau. Took these big steps and got things right or made things right. Now, if everyone else would just look at that example and then do the same. But on whose terms? It's a choice that Esau can make for himself, but we are very unwise and unjust if we think that we can make the choice for him. Should he hold on to his grudge? Why not? It's his to hold on to. Who are we to tell him when he should get over his brother's betrayal? I feel like Jacob could see himself in the position that I've found myself in when I've wronged somebody and I've wanted or felt even that I needed to feel forgiveness. So I say to the person that I've wronged, I'm sorry. And really, I'm just wanting to feel forgiven, and I might be sorry. I might not be. Either way, I feel so lousy. How many times must I say it? Now forgive me and make me feel better. No. It's not for we who have wronged another or who have benefited by the wrong that has been done to set the terms, write the rules for reconciliation. I don't know why Esau did what he did. This text doesn't really tell us why he decided to forgive. And I'm fairly certain that this is not what Jacob deserved in this instance. Of course, Jacob's giving the gift probably did smooth things over a little, but either way, let's cling to the happy ending. Except, pump on the brakes. Not so fast. It turns out that this story is a story meant to help the Israelites better understand the complicated and often violent relationship that they had with their regional neighbors, the Edomites. You might have picked up on that in the text. It was said that Esau was the forefather of the people of Edom, that his children became the people of Edom. Israel's rivals, in fact. It's even in the language of the story. All of this stuff about red, he's got red skin, red hair, he wants to eat red soup. Well, what's with this word red? Well, it turns out that the word red in Hebrew, admoni, is a linguistic play on the word for Edom, which means red or ruddy. It's right in the name. And the enmity seems to be baked into the pie from the beginning. In their souls or in their skin, at least in this story. And Rebekah, poor Rebekah. The text reads, verse 22, the children struggled together with her. And she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? The tension in her womb is so tumultuous, she wants to die. The brothers, the story goes, were meant to be at each other's throats from the onset. So she goes and she asks God, what gives? And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples born of you shall be divided, and one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So there you have it. God said it, I guess. So now we know things have to be this way. How convenient if there is simply no helping these things. Chuck it up to providence or what have you. After all, didn't they come out, one boy clutching the heel of the other, as if to say, as soon as I'm big enough, I'm coming at you. And wasn't one so red that you couldn't help but notice? And didn't one grow up to be all covered in hair? How uncouth. Not so with the smooth-skinned, fair, and nearly perfect Jacob, apple of mom's eye. As for Pops, no, he preferred the tough guy. And here's where I want to push back against this story. In the tradition of many who have done so before me, Jews and Christians alike, I want to say, what more could you expect growing up in a house where one child is preferred over the other? One is born as if he had his father's will clutched in his little baby hands at birth, the deed to the land. Call it a birthright or whatever, dress it up however you like, but it's still wrong. And what more do you expect as the favoritism becomes more and more blatant, as old Isaac lavishes praise on the eldest, as the youngest basks in the admiration of mom, as mom colludes with son to thwart their own flesh and blood, her son, Jacob's brother against brother. And why? Well, fast forward to the point at which this story was being told in its current form, many years later. And you have two sometimes warring people, geographically close to one another, and the Israelites with this tidy narrative to explain it away as inevitable. But is it? What does reconciliation between peoples with complex histories really look like? And I confess, I don't know. And again, I emphasize, it won't be, should it happen, on my own terms. So at some point in preparing the sermon, I decided that I could not write a tidy reconciliation sermon, but should instead look closer to the source of the trouble. If you glance up some verses to the beginning of this chapter, we find the following words written of Isaac, the old man in this story, the father in our story, but also his father, good old Abraham, towards the end of his life. And the text reads, verse 1, Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. Maybe a name you've never heard. Not Sarah, new wife. And she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and it goes on, and it names all of these children that are the heirs of Abraham. But then we get these words. These were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Just sort of ships them off to go live somewhere else. Isaac learned it from his dad, just as Jacob learned it from his dad. Behind every fracture in our society, behind every broken relationship, every rift between communities or persons, there is a complex and often hidden backstory. The ones who win write the narrative, they say, and often control the dialogue. It's true. But even if no one wins, those who were burned will tell the story in such a way as to minimize the damage they caused, even as they licked their own wounds. But behind it all, if you listen, look, and search, you will find the hidden voice of Esau, the hurt voice of Jacob, the rejected voice of Leah, who may have been the least favorite wife of Jacob, but bore the lion's share of Jacob's kids, the blood of Abel crying from the ground for justice. If you listen, you can hear these voices, even today, telling the story. Before we are reconciled in some future time, there must be a reckoning with our past. It is not enough to say to the Edomites and the Israelites that they must just always fight because, and we should reject the notion that God made it this way. There's a story here, and we are a part of it, and because we are a part of it, we can try our best to remind ourselves and anyone else who will listen that we are siblings and come to see each other that way, children of God. We cannot demand forgiveness of the siblings that we may have wronged, or who our parents may have wronged, or their parents before them. The Bible does say that sin does carry on to the third and fourth generations. And you can demand to be forgiven, but that is not right on whose terms. But we can ask for it. What's more, we can move forward with a great deal more humility. We can treat our neighbors and friends and children and strangers with the dignity that is in fact their true birthright. Not a birthright designated for some and denied others, but the birthright that is theirs because they are made in the image of God. Both brothers should have been given the family farm and all the other children that were born of the women Jacob valued as less than, but still made children with. We cannot redress these sibling rivalries alone, but we can affect them a little. Let us commit this day to at least do that. Affect it a little, as best as we are able. It could have begun with Abraham. Isaac should have learned. Jacob, well, what incentive did he have to learn? He ended up with the family farm and then some. It's hard when you have benefited by the tricks of the trade. But then Jacob just passed it down to us, or whoever your parents were, or maybe not. Maybe there is a moment of grace here, grace enough for us to learn and to do different. At some point, we must redress the sins of our parents, and especially our own. Or not, but we all know what happens when we don't. I mean, look around you.